Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Impact Tuesdays webinar. I'm Jennifer Kryshka, CEO of the Jewish Women's Foundation of the Greater Palm Beaches. We are dedicated to advancing the status of women and girls to create long-term social change in the United States and in Israel. So I will give it a minute to let everyone start gathering in, get your coffee, get settled. We are excited to be here this morning. All right, so we are joined by Paula Liang, the chair of Philanos, and Julie Fisher-Cumming, who is the chair of the Community Foundation for Palm Beach and Martin counties. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. So today's Impact Tuesdays webinar is going to be focused on the Florida Women's Funding Alliance, which is a statewide collective of different women's funds from across the state of Florida. All right, so Paula and Julie, thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I first want to start by just getting a little bit of background on the two of you, and then we will talk about kind of the genesis of FWFA. So Julie, let's start with you. So you've done many things, Julie, but and there was a bio for both Paula and Julie included in the registration. But I just want to get some background anyway, because it's always really interesting to hear kind of, what brought you to this work. So Julie, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about you.
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, I am passionate about improving the quality of life for women and girls. I have focused primarily on domestic issues, in particular domestic child sex trafficking, which I found through a whole series. I was at a conference and I heard about this and I couldn't believe this existed. And I call it our dirty little secret in America. And it's just incredible. But I love this work. I feel that the impact we can have is created through collaboratives and working with others and creating networks of change. And that's the only way. You can't do this work. So much of our lives are in silos, particularly now. And it's so important to connect, because that's when we reach our greatest impact. I don't know what else you want me to say, but I'm very grateful to be here and happy to see all the people that are signing on. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleague, Paula, who I hold in the highest esteem.
Thank you, Julie. And just a reminder to everyone, so if you are interested in asking a question, there is a Q&A feature. It may be on the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. It's probably somewhere else if you're on a tablet. But please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we will address them as they come in. All right, so Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
So please tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you. I'm a lawyer by training, and it turns out that if you can be a lawyer, you can also raise money and talk to folks about other things. And so I got into development, and when I moved to Florida, I learned about the world of women's collective giving, and that's how I met Julie. And we started getting in some good trouble together, and I've enjoyed that very much. I was present at the founding of the Florida Women's Funding Alliance, was a founding member, but Julie and Brenda Tate were the co-founders. We've had, when it was possible to meet together, places we would gather at various conferences around the state and talk to folks about our research. When you talk to people about the status of women and girls in Florida, you don't get invited back a lot, because it's not good news, but it's important for people to know the facts, right? It's as Gloria Steinem says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. So, it's important. It's important information to get out there, and we hear it. Those of us who are in giving circles around the state hear it come back to us in grant proposals time after time after time. So it's important stuff, and we're happy to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I just also wanted to point out Julie is a trustee of JWF, and Paula is when she's in Florida, based in Jacksonville.
Yes.
All right. So we'd love to hear, Julie, about the genesis of FWFA, and just sort of what inspired you to want to create this.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, Brenda and I met at, I think it was Women Moving Millions, which is a collective of women's funds that gets together to amplify our impact. And we were just talking about being from Florida, and Brenda was from the west side of Florida and I was from the east side of Florida. And we started talking about I said, well, what's happening in Florida? Because I had just gotten back, I went to graduate school in my mid-50s, which was challenging, and then worked on the Hill, which was also fun to learn about policy, because I knew after I had created foundations and been on foundations, and I knew the only way you could have impact is to impact policy. Everything else, you're just funning around inefficient public systems. So I said we should, we decided to start a network of, we said, we need to connect all these women's funds, all the people that are funding women and girls. It could be guys too. And so that's how we really started. And once we started, we came together and we realized we need to have some research. Data drives change. And that's when we started reading research, and the Institute for Women's Policy Research had, and you'll hear about it, I'm not going to go into it, but had issued a report that said the status of women in Florida got a D+. And that was troubling. I mean, here we are working locally, nationally, even statewide on issues around women and girls. Are we making any difference? And we knew we needed to connect in order to do that. That was sort of the genesis.
Okay. And what was the time frame for this?
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember what year. I think it was like 2014.
Well, it was 2015 when we started meeting. If you want to pull up the slide, Jennifer, of the first group of us met at the
Community Foundation.
At the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin counties, which is this gorgeous facility. They have that's yeah.
Scrolling up to the top.
Way back.
It's
the nicest community foundation I've ever seen. They have an atrium.
Oh, that building, actually, I'm now the chair of that community foundation, and that building was built and it now generates income for us because we rent it to other nonprofits, which is a really great thing. I think anytime you get foundations, nonprofits, or which I call impact organizations under one roof, a lot of change happens just by being in that sort of ethos. So the next slide shows the first group that came together, and we brought in Brenda found a facilitator, and it was like we were all talking so fast. It was like we started on this ride. Something's right when everything serendipitously starts happening. And there was that, Deepak Chopra calls it synchrodestiny. And I think this is what happened. And in one day, I mean, what was it, Paula, 3 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, just about that. We had dinner the night before, but within about a half an hour, Jennifer, if you want to go to the next slide, we had come up with the vision and mission and values. And we tweaked them a little bit this year, but it was essentially this from the start.
And we all agreed, sometimes women talk at each other. We just were so thrilled. It was like we were in this purified air of, we knew something special was happening. We were so, it was wonderful to be part of it.
Yeah, completely aligned. And then we had to figure out what were we going to do?
Right.
And then the IWPR report started coming out, and we grew from that little picture of women to this in 5 years.
And originally we were an affinity group of Florida Philanthropic Network, which is an association of foundations in the state of Florida, different types of foundations, and they really helped us a great deal with the back office and some of the things. But we knew that we were going to grow and mature, and now we are at the Women's Foundation of Florida.
Right. So let's talk about the research because that really has been where our energy has been focused so far with FWFA.
And I don't think anyone's mentioned yet that Jennifer is now the co-chair.
Yes, that is correct. I currently am co-chairing along with Ellen Wiss.
And where's
Yes.
Ellen from? The northeast part of the state, right? The Community Foundation up there?
Yes.
Yes.
So the research has been really exciting. The series of reports that we have produced over the last several years. So Paul, I'll let you kind of go through the slides.
Sure. We undertook this research because we were so shocked by what came out of the decennial research that's done by the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And it's important because 98% of our children are being raised principally by a woman, and that the women are falling in our state are falling way behind. And we learned this in 2015. If you want to keep going, when the status of women in the United States report started coming out, and IWPR tweets this out one factoid in one state at a time. And if you care about the status, if you care about women in your state, it's like being slapped in the face on a daily basis.
I think particularly interesting was this second statistic, that Florida ranks 50th in health insurance for non-elderly, which is women under 65. We are not the last. Puerto Rico's 51. But I just want to say that as a result of this research, that particular feature drove myself and some of my friends. Nancy Brinker, who started the Susan G. Komen Foundation, was so overwhelmed by this statistic that she started the Promise Fund, which helps women access, low-income women access breast and cervical health care, and all of the things that go into all the constraints, and it tries to, through the use of community navigators, help them through all that process so they can get the care they need. So that research already drives change.
Yeah. So, and if we go to the full report card, our overall score in Florida on that report was a D+.
Yeah, that's the next one.
Which is, this is not,
Right, not
fun
great.
if your kid comes home with this report card.
Right.
And no dessert for you, young lady. And so we decided, and then the next slide has it broken down by, yeah, thank you, by category. It's just dismal. And our highest grade is in reproductive rights. Oh my gosh.
Right.
That was shocking. So we went back to them and said, look, this doesn't help us because none of us fund across the state. We all fund where we live. And we asked them to break it down by county.
Right.
And so over the course of two years, they did that. And we released the first report right after the presidential election in 2016. And it turned out that people were really hungry at that point for facts.
Yes, and I will say that the data are very compelling. So, and for anyone who's interested, so on the JWF website, we actually do have a page that talks about FWFA, and you can access all of the reports. So both the full reports that have come out as well as the executive summaries, which is on our jwfpalmbeach.org site.
And Paula, why don't you say the different reports that we did as part of the status of women in Florida?
Sure. The first one was poverty and opportunity.
On
the next slide, I think. There we go. The second was employment, and the third was health and wellness. The first one was we did one statewide phone call with press, and we got above the fold front page news coverage around the state. People were just stunned. The key finding was that no progress had been made in 10 years for women in poverty. A whole bunch of women-owned businesses had been started, but it didn't do anything to raise women out of poverty. And people always say to me, well, where do people do this better? Say, I don't know, the M states, where it's cold and people pay taxes, Minnesota, Massachusetts, pick one. It's just, we're not doing well by women under, who live in poverty and raise their children in poverty. That was the key takeaway from that one. There was a lot in there about the gender gap and about family leave, the need for family leave, the need for affordable childcare, the need for affordable housing.
Right.
It's all in that report.
So, I mean, and so I think one of the great aspects of these reports, so not only do we have data, but we also received recommendations from IWPR on what we can do to improve things for women and girls in the state of Florida.
And on the basis of the poverty report, my organization went to Tallahassee when there was a child marriage ban bill before our state legislature. And Jennifer alerted us to this and lobbied against a whole bunch of dumb amendments to the bill and got them taken out.
Yes.
Because we knew that, young women who were married off to typically someone who's impregnated them at a young age are bound to live in poverty. And we were able to point to those statistics. So
yes, among other things. Actually, the first Impact Tuesday webinar that we had was with Unchained at Last, which is the organization that's really leading the charge on forced and arranged marriages and child marriage, which you can go back and watch also on our website if you're interested in learning more about that.
What is the age in Florida now?
Well, it's not
17.
They didn't make it 18. They made it 17, but they took out the Romeo and what do they call it? The Romeo and Juliet exemption.
Right. So it's 17 currently in Florida, I believe, with no exceptions. Previously, it was lower than that, and a judge or with parental consent could actually sort of waive what the previous age was. So it's certainly better than it was, but it's not perfect because the Bright Line bill, the goal was to get it to be 18, so that you had to at least be legally an adult before you could consent to marriage.
But it's way better than it was. So the next report was on employment and earnings, the gender gap in Florida is real. It's better than it is in a lot of places, but not for a great reason. If you want to keep going, Jennifer. This is sort of a snapshot of the state, and these reports are filled with maps like this that show you for your county, are you low, medium, high in terms of what the metric is. You can see my county and yours.
Right.
St. John's and Palm Beach, and we're both high, but you can see where it's low. The center of the state, the Panhandle, not too surprising. And oddly, the gender gap is worst where income is highest.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, a fry cook makes what a fry cook makes, but a financial planner, there can be a lot of discretion about how somebody's paid. And when there's discretion, there's discrimination.
Right.
So the next slide shows us when women will catch up, 2038. And actually.
Right, and that's white women, I believe.
That's exactly right.
Right.
I was on our NPR station to talk about the gender gap on Gender Pay Day, which is for white women, which is in the year I did it was in April, and for Black women it's in August. Right. And for Native women it's never, basically.
Yes.
So
a lot of work to be done still in the state of Florida.
And this actually is a pretty good statistic for comparatively, but it's because we pay men so badly, because our whole economy is built on tourism and minimum wage jobs. So
migrant workers and
mhm,
documents.
exactly. So, but if we did achieve parity, it would add 28 billion with a B dollars to our economy every year.
Right. And I think that that's a really important fact to point out, that it's not, when we're talking about women and girls, we're obviously talking about families and communities, an entire state, right? These things are affecting everyone. It doesn't just affect, the women and girls who are immediately impacted by this. So.
Right. This is money that would be circulating around in our economy if they were being paid fairly.
Right. So the issues impacting women and girls are really issues that are impacting all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Hillary says, women's rights are human rights. And finally, health and well-being was released in May of 2018. The chief finding of this was that, again, we have more uninsured women than any other state, except Puerto Rico, which is not a state. But and that makes sense, right? Because we're the third largest state by population, and New York and California expanded Medicaid, and we tragically did not.
Right.
And never has that been more apparent than it is now, that we should have done.
And the next slide really outlines that, which is shocking, which is what this report is what led Nancy to start the Promise Fund. She couldn't believe it. She blames me for putting that report in her mailbox. Look what you did. I mean, it was so startling to me, because we're not a state that, we have a lot of, industry here. We have a lot of, the economy's growing. And to see this is just unacceptable.
Well, and even those folks who get Medicaid get
So little.
So little. Most states award Medicaid to folks who live at 200% of the poverty line. So if I think for a family of four, the poverty line is $24,000 ish. So they award Medicaid to families who make $48,000. In Florida, you only get Medicaid if you make 75% of the poverty line. So, like, let's say $18,000.
It's that whole working poor.
It's very difficult. So,
yes, moving on to the good
it's all
news.
tough stuff. We don't get invited back a lot, but it's important to know what it is, right?
Well, that's why data drives change. And this is what, and I want to really acknowledge Judith Seltzer, who started the Women's Foundation of Florida, because she's the one that really helped us zero in on how we could, what policies should we attack first? What is something we really could see changes and that would be more widespread?
Well, and she identified that there were municipalities that were being run by 30-something guys who would like to have some paid family medical leave when their children were born.
Right.
And so she started a state coalition, and this is how the map looked in, I think this was 2017. And that's great, but look how it, and I have no facility for making maps, so look how the next slide will show you what the list is like now. That's pretty cool.
Right. So these are the cities that now, municipalities that offer paid family leave to their employees.
Mm-hmm.
And she zeroed in on municipalities because it was easier to convince them than it was to do business.
Right.
So you have to start somewhere to gain some traction.
Right. And it's principally around the birth or adoption of a child, because they figured it's not going to be every employee. It's not, but it's a start, and it's a way for them to figure out how to fund it and see how it goes, and it's opening the door.
It is. It's showing it can work.
Yeah.
And that's really going to be the impact for business, to realize that in fact their workforce will be more productive if they enact this. I think people are starting to see this because of what's happened with this pandemic, is that people can be very productive with flex time.
Right. It's sort of a more strategic long-term thing.
Don't you think?
Right. So,
yeah.
All right. So moving on to the next side, to the status of girls and young women in Florida. So this was the next phase in reporting. So Paula, yeah, tell us more about how these reports were put together and sort of what's coming next.
I invited Julie to come to Jacksonville because we have a policy center that was created by, that was funded by one of the founders of Women's Giving Alliance, Dolores Weaver, and started by a brilliant woman named Luanda Raboira, who just recently retired, actually. But the policy center goes on. This is their mug. Oops, wrong. Anyway, and they have unique experience in the lived experiences of Florida girls and experience. They brought down the incarceration rate in Duval County of girls by 65% over 5 years. For some reason, they identified the school, the three middle schools that were sending way too many young teenage girls into lockdown.
Mostly girls of color, right?
Oh yes.
Yes.
They intervened in those schools with programming that put a stop to it. So we met with them. Julie, I believe, asked for a job.
If you're a policy geek, it's like the mecca.
And then we met with Dolores. She put up the beginning funding for this. Gave us.
How old she is, Paula? Tell how old she is. I mean, she's like over. Wasn't she 80 or something?
Oh, she's in her mid 80s. Yeah, she's
brilliant and far.
Dolores and her husband brought the Jaguars to Jacksonville, and she's the best. She does most good things that happen in my community have her hand in them somewhere.
Which I would like to move to Jacksonville because there's the most amazing women, brilliant women who live there, and they create change. They just all get together and say, "We're going to do this."
Oh,
well, we need you here, Julie, in Palm Beach County. So
I know. I'm not trying to say anything negative. I just
you can't leave. And so just to clarify the difference between the women's reports and the girls' reports. So the status of girls, really talking about middle school and high school age girls.
Yeah. I mean, there's statistics about their grade reading levels and that sort of stuff. But we all know that when the rubber meets the road in middle school, right?
Sure.
That's when you really have to keep your eyes out. And
I think this report will be especially helpful on a county level because of the school system. I mean, you really can create coalitions around change. With this.
Yeah, and this also is a 3-part report. The first 2 parts have been published. The third part is going to be the recommendations. Because this policy center is hyper focused on Florida, they're very good at sussing out what can get done, even with a legislature in which you sort of want to throw up your hands and go, what?
And so the first 2 reports covered which 2 topics, Paula?
Education, health and wellness, and system involvement.
Okay.
And the third piece is going to be policy recommendations, but we need to get past the election before this policy center wants to talk about what might be possible. They've gotten some stuff through in terms of sex trafficking funding that you wouldn't have thought they could get through this legislature because they've done polling and they know how to frame things. So we're going to wait to release the third piece, which will sort of fill the narrative arc for this study. until we see what we're dealing with. You know, there's no point in going to the legislature and saying, you know, we think there should be mandatory pre-K if we've still got Richard Corcoran trying to eliminate public education. You know?
So the next report will be coming out sometime in November.
Well, yeah, yes, sometime in maybe, yeah. We need to see who we got.
I would say that we also do a day on, we have gone to the Day on the Hill. I think it's a lot of this change I noticed, even for foundations in general, is visiting your local legislators and saying, this is what we fund in your area. And this is why we need you to change things. It really has a big impact. And change creates one-on-one, you know, with these relationships.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think this is the day, this is us on the, in Tallahassee.
Yep.
And it doesn't need, you don't need to take 30 people because their offices are like tiny. If you take 5 or 6 people, they feel like you've brought a crowd.
Well,
right.
And they like it too. They like to hear the stories. They like to hear the data.
Sure. And this is a, you know, a nonpartisan effort.
Totally.
Because issues that impact women and girls, obviously, like we said before, they impact everyone. And so we absolutely are not, you know, partisan in the way that we are trying to, you know, to encourage legislative change to make things better in our state.
Absolutely.
All right. So
we're all looking forward to seeing what comes out of the final girls study. And then, of course, you know, research has to be updated. There's always a new thread to pick up and other trends to follow. So it's never done.
Research is not inexpensive. I mean, I think the first report was 125,000 that we raised, and the girls' report was about the same thing with PR and.
Yep.
So
worth it. It creates a lot of change. So we ask you to join us on this journey.
Yes, I mean, so let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, so again, I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please, you know, submit them through the Q&A feature. We're happy to answer questions about FWFA or any of the research. And so, you know, Julie did mention, you know, now FWFA is kind of in a new phase, and we are going to be releasing the third girls report in November and sort of moving forward. You know, what do we think FWFA will look like in the future, and for people who are interested in getting involved with us, or who are interested to know, like, we have this great research and what can they do to kind of help disseminate it, or, you know, what do we want people to do with this research, and what will the research do to improve things?
Well,
I would like to also say that, oh, I'm sorry, Paula, go ahead.
That's okay. Disseminate it. I put it in the hands of Gwen Graham last cycle. And I put it in the hands of a friend who's running for Congress this cycle. People should know what the status is, and all of this is pre-pandemic. So it, you know, likely has not gotten better. This, and the census is being conducted now. That will be the status. That will be the basis for the status of women in America 2025. Don't get excited that, you know, it's not, we're not likely to see much of a change. So be prepared, but we can't give up. We still have to keep working on it.
Agreed. Julie?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is, I look at, from a global perspective, our state having this kind of alliance, not every state has this, and I think it's in the size of our state being so large, I think it's really special that we were able to do this. We're always looking for new members to join us on this journey, and I have seen the power of this policy change, as we all have. It's really remarkable, and it's just incredible to be part of something that you know will create change and will have an impact on well-being.
Yes. And so I can say that, as part of FWFA, like we certainly use the research to inform our work. And every time a report came out, we would share it with our grantees as well as with other local organizations in the community. And kind of a sort of a funny anecdote around that, we have a teen program called No Small Change, which actually the Love Light Foundation has funded in the past. And so our teen program has a grant making component. And when they were interviewing one of the organizations a few years ago, it was, I believe, Dress for Success, and it was for an employment program to train women to prepare for employment. They actually said, one of the reasons why we have this program is because of this report. And they handed this report to the teens, which was, I think, on the Status of Women employment report. And totally unbeknownst to the fact that we were part of FWFA and part of the initiative that helped to fund this report. So clearly, we are seeing that different organizations are using this research to help guide their programming. We were very proud of that. So, so I think it's really important that we continue to share this research. I think that, even though the Status of Women reports came out a few years ago, it's still really relevant even in 2020. And so we want people to continue sharing all of the research reports and not just, the last 2 girls reports and then the upcoming girls report that we'll be releasing in November.
Jennifer, are the infographics that they can use, are they on the website too?
Yes, we actually also have the infographics on our website.
There's quite a few too that are really outstanding if you're writing a report to your donors or if you're doing it to your friends. I think visually they really tell a story that's quick and easy without having to go deep,
Yes, I agree. So they are broken out into different categories. So you can get a snapshot of just poverty or health and well-being, which I do agree that people seem to like the visual. So it can be really compelling just to present this, this one
Also
page.
good if you're trying to explain the gender gap to someone who does, and to a doubter, it's very compelling stuff.
So, so another question I have for both of you, and this is really more because, both of you are really philanthropic. Sort of, in your individual rights. And so I'm curious to know, Paula and Julie, has your involvement with FWFA or, as a result of the research, impacted the way that you are looking at your own philanthropy?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Paula.
totally. And so has the pandemic. I told all of the elite educational institutions that my husband and I attended that, we're done. We're just done.
And your endowments.
Yeah.
And so what have you pivoted to then? So if, let's say, alumni giving, I guess, is no longer a priority for you, then what have you, what are you pivoting to?
Frontline organizations that are serving women and girls. Public, everybody needs a decent public education. We've just got to do more.
Mm-hmm. And Julie, for you?
I would say because of this report, I also live in Detroit, although I'm a full-time resident of Florida, but I was telling Paula and Jennifer before that I was very involved in One Fair Wage in the state of Michigan to try to get it on the ballot, to raise the income, how much they're paying tipped workers, because in Michigan, and I think in Florida it's worse, they only got their tips, and you'd have people serving you who are on food stamps. I mean, the women, it's primarily women,
right.
And to raise them to minimum wage rather than just their tips. Because what often happens is even in the best restaurants, the men get the tips. I mean, it's just what happens because they're in the management positions for the most part. So that, and also I think when I try to engage donors, data changes the way they see things. I'm very passionate about the causes and I get really passionate, but it's not until I say, okay, this is what exists. And when I handed Nancy Brinker that report, she goes, okay, Susan G. Komen, I created it, it's wonderful, but we need to do something locally to help these women. And then we started getting the research on what existed locally about low-income women accessing care around breast and cervical cancer. And often they would put it off because they didn't have childcare, they didn't have, they'd lose their job, they were on minimum wage. And we decided to do these community health navigators that were embedded in community that helped navigate all of those constraints so that they could get the care that they wanted, and then providing a place where they could get that care. So I think it drives change. It's just remarkable. And it tells a story, a very important story, in ways that nothing else can. And I think it's brought along donors that we normally would not have.
Mm-hmm. So a statistic, that we look at here at JWF, and I've seen, a little bit of range with that, but when we're looking at philanthropic dollars and what percentage of those dollars are being directed at issues impacting women and girls specifically, it's usually something between 7 and 8%. Which
that's high. I think that I've seen like 1.6.
So but either way, right? We're talking about a really low percentage. And I think that often when I talk to donors, or to anyone who's interested in philanthropy, they're usually very, very surprised to hear that that's the percentage. So I think that it's really great that, both of you, Paula and Julie, have looked at this research and made adjustments in your own philanthropy. And I certainly think that we want to encourage other donors, especially, other women philanthropists, to really look at what the needs are in the state of Florida for women and girls, and to consider that for their philanthropy.
Yeah, I'm really surprised, that Philanos is a network of 76 women's giving circles, funds, and foundations. Only a third of us fund women and girls exclusively. I mean, we all fund some, but it always.
That's interesting. I'm shocked, Paula.
Right?
I know, and often that doesn't translate. Women's giving circles don't necessarily transfer, and I that's really shocking to me. Because how many? I mean, in your network, that's so broad and deep. It really flattened the field of philanthropy. These giving circles, and that's interesting.
It's very interesting.
Right. Right. I mean, so clearly what that statistic is showing is that even women philanthropists are not necessarily using a gender lens in their own philanthropy.
Right.
So we clearly have a long way to go in the state of Florida. But I do want to say, I know a lot of the research and the D+ grade that Florida has received is not, it's not the most encouraging information. But so for the two of you, when you look at that, even though, we see, I don't know, I guess like all this room for us to improve, how do you look at that and take that and use that, I guess, in a positive way? Or how can you, keep people optimistic sort of in light of this research?
Well, we find the stories that, we find the good stories to tell. There's always, every one of our grantees has a story to tell of how they took the grant and made a difference in somebody's life, and how they're we just keep fighting the good fight. It's all I know how to do.
And trying to find organizations, like I really think funding policy is not something a lot of people like to do. It's sort of like it exists up in the ethers,
Right.
But you need it to drive change. You need both. You need direct service and you need a policy. So I really do love to fund policy because it's one of those gaps that needs to be done in order to drive this. And but I, for myself, have been trying to find not necessarily large organizations, but organizations that really do make a difference. Although I will say in the state of Florida, PACE, which Paula, I think, introduced me to, PACE Center for
Girls.
Yeah, I think there's 13 in the state or 17. It's amazing. And they work with at-risk girls. It's right. It's a day program. They just opened one. Well, they've had one in West Palm for a while. And these girls, all of them end up graduating from high school and going on to a career college. Those funding things that really make a difference is, to me, finding the programs that are going to empower them. And
Mhm.
that's why I really like to fund girls programs, because if you get them young, it makes a big difference. It creates, impact later in life for productivity, as you might imagine.
Sure, sure. I mean, and so kind of to both of your points, Julie, JWF is a social change foundation. And so we also like to fund policy, and we also like to fund programs that are focused on girls, because that's where you see a lot of social change happening, right? Is if you start earlier with education and empowerment and resources, then you can have hopefully a better outcome in the long term. And certainly policy, right, has a really long-term effect for, I think, the greatest number of people. And Pace Center for Girls is actually one of our grantees. And we did do an Impact Tuesday webinar with them a few weeks ago, which people can watch on our website. So,
Did you have
so
local
yes.
leadership, or did you get Mary Marks too?
Sorry.
Did you get Mary Marks on? She's the statewide director.
So we fund the West Palm
Oh, great.
Pace Center for Girls. So we had April Brownlee on.
Great.
But they are excellent. And Dolores Barr-Weaver is also one of our grantees. And Lawanda Rivora, who you mentioned earlier, I believe helped to create Pace Center for Girls. So before she was with Dolores Barr-Weaver, I know that she was, was heavily involved with
Yeah,
Pace.
it
So,
started in a church basement in Jacksonville. It's crazy.
so I think it's interesting to see how all of these organizations are connected, who are trying to do this really important work. So. So other, Paula and Julie, other thoughts just about the research or FWFA that you'd like to share with everyone?
Well, I just think I would say about this, the issue that's really dear to my heart is addressing domestic child sex trafficking. And some policy really is going to change that. And because of some of the research that's been funded, particularly with the Miami Foundation, they call it now, but it's the Community Foundation it was a women's fund in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
They did a study on what this looked like, and they drove change to get these safe harbor laws where the girls, rather than being incarcerated for being trafficked, would
Sure.
end up in safe harbor. And it's like driving those kinds of, you need both, you really do.
Mm-hmm. Paula?
I would encourage folks to join the work. And I know, Jennifer, you and Ellen are working on what that's going to look like under new management, so to speak, with the Women's Foundation of Florida. But I think Julie and Brenda always envisioned a statewide coalition of women's foundations and funds and community foundations, but also individuals and agencies that serve women and girls should be a part of this work too, because they know what they need and they know what they're seeing on the ground. So I think we all want this to be a much broader statewide coalition going forward, and that's part of what the move was about, was our ability to broaden the outreach. So.
Mm-hmm.
And it's creating a movement to create this web of support.
Right. Are there particular parts of the state that we need, more involvement?
Oh, well, I think we have no uptake on the Panhandle.
Right.
I gave a talk once in Gainesville, and I just got a lot of their,
Okay. So I guess it's good. So for anyone who's watching or listening, we'd certainly love to get more involvement from organizations or donors in the Panhandle. So I guess if anyone is interested in getting more involved with FWFA, I'm happy to talk to them as one of the current co-chairs. So you can reach out to me through email or by phone. So
I'm happy to talk to folks too. I'm sorry I neglected to put our contact information on the slides. I wish I.
Yeah, well.
Yes, and I can share that with everyone in a follow-up as well. So unless, Paula, you want to give us your your information right now, people can write it down.
I will put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, good idea. Put it in the chat. So if anyone is interested in speaking with Paula, you can have her information. So
I would say to everybody, please just join us. You don't have to, feel like you have to fund, lots of zeros. I mean, every body counts. Your voice counts. your heart counts. So I would ask you to join us as we go on this journey.
Yes, yes, I agree. And if you're interested in learning more, just reach out to me and we will get you information as FWFA continues to grow and strengthen. So thank you so much, Paula and Julie, for being here and speaking with us today. I'm just so excited we had a chance to talk about FWFA.
We always like to see each other and we love to see
Yeah.
you. So.
Thank you for your leadership now. It's really at an important time, and I really appreciate what you and Ellen have done.
Oh, sure. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us today, either through Facebook or through Zoom. Again, JWF's website is jwfpalmbeach.org. You can learn more about the Florida Women's Funding Alliance, as well as the other organizations that we fund that we mentioned earlier. As always, I do like to remind everyone who is watching that JWF is entirely supported by individual donors. And so if you would like to make a contribution to support our work, you can also do so through our website or by calling our office at 561-275-2200. All of our Impact Tuesday webinars are recorded and stored on our website, so you can watch any of them and you can share them. So I hope that everyone stays safe and healthy, and we will see you soon. So thanks again, Julie and Paula. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.